Putin knows if he does that, he will lose everything. His government will collapse. Russia will collapse as a country. He will lose his activity in Ukraine.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The World in 10, the Times' daily podcast about global security. And I'm delighted today to be joined by former Colonel Philip Ingram, who's previously served as a military intelligence officer in the UK Armed Forces and as a NATO planner. And he's a regular voice on Times Radio. Philip, welcome. We want to speak today specifically about Russia's alleged use of an intercontinental ballistic missile against the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. First things first, what are we talking about here? What is an intercontinental ballistic missile?
Right. The clue's in the name. So intercontinental, it can go very long distances between different continents. So, and ballistic is the way the missile fires. So it goes up vertically and then will come down vertically in a ballistic trajectory. So it'll come down faster than the speed of sound. An intercontinental ballistic missile, the one that they were talking of here, has the NATO designation SS-31. If this is the one that was used, there's some debate on that at the moment. It's got a range of about 5,800 kilometres. It's fired from a mobile truck or specifically designed, and it effectively goes up to the edge of space and then comes down. It's designed to carry 4 independently targetable nuclear warheads or conventional warheads. So missiles are designed to take something that will go bang the other end. It could be conventional, could be nuclear, to have an effect. And it's all range. So you get short-range ballistic missiles, you get intercontinental ballistic missiles, then you get cruise missiles, which are completely different because they fly like an aircraft. They don't go up to come down very fast indeed.
And of course, we should be clear, there is no suggestion that this was armed with any kind of nuclear warhead. But the very fact that Vladimir Putin has clearly decided he wants to send a weapon designed to carry a nuclear warhead into Ukraine is pretty ominous. What do you make of that decision by Russia to launch one?
We've got a bit of manhood waving going on between missiles and missile sizes because, of course, this week we had the US decision to authorize Ukraine to use the ATACMS missile inside Russia, which is a smaller missile. It's a ballistic missile. It's a tactical ballistic missile. And then we had, following from that, the reported use of the UK-French Storm Shadow or Scalp cruise missile inside Russia, and that is a tactical missile as well in the warhead it carries, but it flies differently. And then Putin's going, well, my missile is bigger than your missile, so I'm going to fire what has been reported as an intercontinental ballistic missile. There have been some reports out of the United States and other places to say that no, it was just a normal ballistic missile. So there's different ranges that can be fired. Effectively the missile's bigger, it's longer, it's got more fuel. That gives it more range, and they can carry similar or the bigger missiles carry bigger payloads because they've got more thrust and more engine power in them.
How seriously do you think we should take the nuclear threat by Russia? I mean, Vladimir Putin in recent weeks has changed the Russian nuclear doctrine. He's essentially lowered the threshold that would be required for Russia to launch a nuclear strike. And this clearly will alarm a lot of people, this use of this intercontinental ballistic missile. So how seriously should we take that risk?
Well, I think as soon as anyone starts threatening nuclear responses, we should take it seriously because we're not in a position to be able to react to that. And you can't get there quickly at all. So we need to start preparations in case someone uses it. Is Vladimir Putin going to use a nuclear weapon anytime soon? Or are there any indications that suggest he's going to? No. And the reason why, even if he uses a tactical nuclear weapon, and that is usually defined on the range of the weapon and the yield that comes out of it, which is very important. Even if he uses a tactical nuclear weapon against the Ukrainians or as a demonstration of his intent, as soon as he explodes that, as soon as he uses it, he will lose immediately the tacit support that he's relying on from China and from India. Those are the two big ones that would hurt him. Iran, North Korea wouldn't really care. But as soon as he does that, India will not want to accept any Russian oil to process into from crude oil into petroleum products and others that they can sell back to us at hugely inflated prices. And China will suddenly go, we can't get associated with this because of the trade sanctions that could come in, and we're going to have to condemn it and push you away. Putin knows if he does that, he will lose everything. His government will collapse. Russia will collapse as a country. He will lose his activity in Ukraine.
Moscow has also declared that the new American ballistic missile defense base in northern Poland, which was opened only last week, is a threat to Russia. And we've also had this week the temporary closure of the US embassy in Kyiv because of fears of a potential air attack. Is Putin trying to deliver a warning to the West and the US in particular at the moment?
Putin's playing the information game. What he wants to do is threaten us, and he's the bully with a big stick. And as soon as he thinks that the stick isn't big enough, he gets another one, and he'll stand there slapping the stick in his hand, and he'll slap it even louder, because he knows that will take up political capital in debating it. It'll create doubt in people's minds. He knows that there's a change of regime coming in the United States with the Trump presidency taking over from Biden. He's trying to influence that. It's all about influencing. He knows that there is going to be an election in Germany in 2025 because the German government's collapsed. He knows that there's debate going on around other parts of Europe and other parts of the world. So he's trying to maintain this strongman stance to those that are supporting him. So to China, you're showing that he's strong. To India, to Iran, to North Korea, to the wider BRICS community that he's part of, to try and suggest that Russia is still this strong country that's out there. And that's important to him, but it's all rhetoric. But if we look at how much debating time it's taking up with our politicians in the commentary that's going on, not just in the UK, but across the globe, he's succeeding in doing that.
If a nuclear strike by Russia remains highly unlikely, are we likely to see an increase in other kinds of tactics? I mean, specifically this so-called hybrid warfare, things like cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, sabotage, even targeted assassinations. The Times has been reporting about exploding parcels at distribution centres in the UK and Germany. Are those the kind of tactics we may see more of now?
Oh, 100%. We are seeing more of it. Only in the past couple of days, we've had the Chinese flagship allegedly captained by a Russian in the Baltic, being accused of damaging or cutting internet cables between different states in the Baltic. And the Danish Navy went and have intercepted that ship, and it's currently at anchor while the investigation's ongoing. You mentioned the parcels in the DHL distribution centres, one in the UK, one in Leipzig in Germany. These were parcels that were going to go on aircraft that could have brought aircraft down, and they've been linked back to the Russians. We've seen there's been confirmed Russian activity in burning the Diehl factory down in Berlin. Now, Diehl is a huge arms manufacturer, and that mysteriously caught fire. We've had warehouses that have been storing and sending stuff to Ukraine in London that have caught fire, and individuals have been prosecuted. And as part of the court cases, their links to Russia has come out. And of course, going back historically, we've got the Novichok attack on Sergei Skripal in 2018, and then going even further back, we've got the polonium-210 attack on Alexander Litvinenko. It's always been there in the background, but yes, we are seeing a ramping up of activity. But the biggest area we're seeing a ramping up of is in the areas that is causing fractions between international organizations or in political structures within countries. It's getting that proverbial information knife in and wiggling it to try and create debate, to try and take up political time debating things that will mean that time can't be spent on dealing with issues that are coming out of Russia. And of course, it's stimulating other things that are around the world. If we look at what's going on in the Middle East, in particular with Israel, who's the big winner out of the 7th of October attack? It's Vladimir Putin, because he came off the front page headlines. And everything then focused elsewhere, and lots of political effort, military effort and diplomatic effort is focused on what's going on in Israel and going on in the Middle East. Putin's been quietly continuing what he's doing inside Ukraine and has been off the headlines.
On the ATACMS and the Storm Shadow missiles, of course, the ATACMS are US-supplied long-range missiles and the Storm Shadows are UK-supplied long-range missiles. What explains the kind of difference in messaging around their approval? Because with the ATACMS, we had this kind of briefing last weekend saying Biden is going to allow Ukraine to fire them in the Kursk region of Russia. And yet with the Storm Shadow, the first that we knew that they obviously had been approved for use inside Russia was that they had been used. What explains that difference, and is one better than the other? I suppose it depends on whether you look at things militarily or diplomatically.
Well, that's the reason why there's a difference. From a military perspective, the best proof of use whenever you're dealing with an enemy is for it to land on them and go bang. Without them being told it's going to come at some stage, because they can prepare some form of defences or start to look out for them. Why was there a difference? Well, as you said, the US ATACMS missile is US owned. I think the authorization only came in now because what President Biden didn't want to do was, whenever the polls were saying that the US presidential election was on a shoestring, there was a hair's breadth between the two sides, as all the polls did say. He didn't want to push any voters one way or the other, and that's why he was indecisive. So it was US domestic politics that stopped the decision to allow the use of these weapons inside Russian territory. Now that Donald Trump's come in, it's right and proper that he makes that decision and says, get on with it. I even think, and I've got no evidence of this, but it could have been Donald Trump's team that's come in and said, we support you in doing this because you make the decision. And then when we come in, we don't have to make the decision. That gives us more maneuver room when it comes to negotiations with each side. On the British side, it's slightly more complex because the Storm Shadow missile is a joint venture between the UK and France. And therefore, there are two nations involved, and they have to both get their decisions, give their decisions for its appropriate use. But also because it relies on certain electronics that come from the United States from a guidance perspective, and these are military guidance levels. So it relies on components that are what are called ITAR controlled, which are supplied to the US government under very specific rules as to how they can be used and everything else. Because they're military grade and it's using US systems, there was the US authorization that was needed for them to be used as well. As soon as the decision was made for the ATACMS to be done, that automatically meant that they'd make the decision on the Storm Shadow, or Scalp, as the French call it, and therefore it could be used.
And just finally, Philip, given the events of the past few days, of the past week or so, and we've seen the approval of the ATACMS and the Storm Shadow, we've seen Putin changing Russian nuclear doctrine. Now we've got the use of this intercontinental ballistic missile, which is pretty unprecedented, the use of it on a city. Is this the most volatile the war in Ukraine has been since the early days of Russia's full-scale invasion?
Yes, and both sides are hurting very badly, especially with the manpower that they've got to continue to fight the tactical battles. And you get two wounded rats and have them in the same pen, and that's when they become desperate, and that's when they become more dangerous. So we have to be very careful about this. However, the one thing I will say is we have to be careful about analysing who's winning and losing by just looking at the tactical battle. And the analogy I'll use here is, if you look at Vietnam, the United States didn't lose a single tactical battle in Vietnam. They lost the war. And therefore, by trying to suggest that Putin is winning tactically in the East, when we look at his economy collapsing, potatoes have gone up 65% in price in the last year, butter's gone up 30% in the last year. The Chinese banks are turning around and doing extra checks on credit lines whenever they're doing business into Russian companies and all the rest of it. You look at the Russian economy in the whole, and it's on the edge of collapse. Where we're going to get to the end of this war is not necessarily a military victory on the battlefield. It's going to be a victory that will influence what's going on the battlefield, and that could be the collapse of the country's economy, the collapse of a government, the collapse of Putin, and all the rest of it, where Russia is forced into that position. It could equally be the same for Ukraine, where if there isn't the military support that's in there, they don't have the economic wherewithal, and Europe isn't giving it that level of political support, and you get that political collapse rather than it being something decisive on the battlefield.
Philip, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.